back to the Daily Grind. Thanks for checking out the channel. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back pickle biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
Before we get into these mystical Bellator predictions, I've got to start this video off with a shout out to Paulo C for the huge $10 donation. Much appreciated, good sir. Now let's get straight to these bracket busting predictions. I'm about to bust my own bracket, yo. We've got the heavyweight Grand Prix going on with Bellator, the Bellator heavyweight title tournament. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I did my bracket, like whenever the first bracket was first announced, I believe I had Chael, Sonnen winning. So I'm going to have to update that bracket before this tournament starts. You know, it would be different if the tournament already started and I was trying to back out on my bracket. But just seeing Rampage, man, he's actually looking really motivated, looking good coming into this fight. But we'll get into that all talking whenever we get to predicting the co-main event. But let's start off with the first fight of the night. Georgi Karakhanyan versus Henry Corrales. Now, originally I was, this was one of the harder fights for me to pick, especially in Bellator. A lot of these guys are less known by the fans that haven't been in MMA for fucking 20 years or more. I've been a hardcore MMA fan for about 5 years, casual for about 10, but that doesn't mean I know who the hell Georgi Karakhanyan and Henry Corrales is. So if you don't know, I did the research for you. So I came out with my pick being Georgi Karakhanyan. Man, come on. I'm just gonna call my boy Georgi. I'm not gonna keep saying his name all wrong because I think it's Karakhanyan. Georgi Karakhanyan. Alright, I'm calling him Georgi for this video's sake. I'm picking Georgi to win this fight. Hopefully that makes up for me mispronouncing his last name. But I'm picking Georgi to win this fight because he's actually a very experienced Bellator veteran. Actually, I pulled up my notes, my fucking notepad notes before I start going off the top of my head. Georgi Karakhanyan is 27. God, I said I'm going to call him Georgi. Georgi is 27-7. He's 3-1 in his last 4 fights, and all 3 of his wins are coming by KO or TKO. So Georgi ain't fucking around. I'm going with Georgi to win this fight because he's more experienced. Henry Corrales is only 14-3, so he's got less overall fights. Henry Corrales is on a 2-fight winning streak. His 2 losses, one of his losses coming to Patricio Pitbull, and his two wins are coming over Cody Bollinger and Noah Lawat. But neither Cody nor Noah are as experienced as Georgi Karakhanyan, or just on the research I did, they're not on Georgi's level. And Henry Corrales has only lost 3 times in his career, but the 3 people that Henry lost to were all savvy veterans, and that's what he's going to be fighting. So Henry Corrales has a chance, but I'm picking Georgi to win this fight. Georgi has lost 7 times in his career, but he's been fighting the best, some of the best guys since 2010. He fought Patricio Pitbull, I believe, in 2011, Joe Warren in 2010. So Georgi's definitely a savvy veteran, and that's what has beat Henry Corrales so far to date. So it's going to be a great fight, though. It was hard for me to call this fight, but I'm picking Georgi in my mystical predictions. And by the way, I gotta say this before some fights come up, and I can't say it anymore. I went 4 for 4 in my UFC 219 predictions. Ching-ching, got that right. So before you get to disrespecting my predictions, put some respect on my name. Now, let's move to Aaron Pico, the brightest prospect in MMA, not in Bellator, not in UFC. I'm talking MMA. Aaron Pico is a very young kid. He's only 21 years old, and he's got all the eyes of the MMA world on him, and that can be a lot of pressure. He did lose his Bellator debut to Zach Freeman, but he came out and redeemed himself versus Justin Lin in his second Bellator fight with a brilliant performance, a brilliant knockout. And now Aaron Pico is going to be fighting Shane Crutchin, who is, I believe, 1-1 in the last 2 years. Oh, actually since 2014. So he's 1-1 in his last 2 fights since 2014. Both of those fights came in World Series of Fighting. Before that, he was pretty successful, but it was in leagues I've never heard of. Shane Crutchin is 12-3. But the only 2 fights that came out of an organization I'm familiar with, which was World Series of Fighting, he was 1-1 in, and he's only fought twice since 2014, and he's going to be fighting young Thundercat Aaron Pico, one of the brightest prospects out there. So I'm picking Aaron Pico to win this fight, and I mean, I think Aaron Pico's, even if it's pressure, whatever, I think he's got all that under control right now. If you don't know about Aaron Pico yet and his background and why he's such a highly touted prospect, it's not just like some hype job. He was like raised in MMA and shit. So I'm picking Aaron Pico, rocking with Aaron Pico. Let's move to the next fight of the night, which could be the co-main event. This is a good enough to be a Bellator main event. Michael Chandler versus Georgi Yamaguchi. Michael Chandler, the former Bellator lightweight champion, facing off against Georgi Yamaguchi, who's coming off of a big win over Aaron Picolati. Georgi Yamaguchi, I believe, is 22-3. Yeah, he's 22-3 in his professional career. And Georgi Yamaguchi, like I said, he's coming off of a big win over Adam Picolati, but he's going to be facing Michael Chandler here, who you can see I actually picked to win the fight. Now, when Georgi Yamaguchi fought Adam Picolati, I believe he was actually the underdog, and I picked him to win that fight as the underdog, and he's going to be the underdog in this fight as well. And I'm not going to pick I can't pick it this time. I mean, we're talking about Michael Chandler here. Michael Chandler is not only a Bellator legend, he's an MMA legend. Like, he's one of the most respected lightweights in the world, regardless of division. He's fought the best of the best in Bellator. There's been talks of him fighting in the UFC just because, the skill level's there. But at this point, it's not about, it's not all about the skill. Bellator, if they've got Michael Chandler and he's comfortable at Bellator, there's no reason for him to go to the UFC, you know what I'm saying? And I'm sure the UFC would love to have Michael Chandler if he was a free agent, but that's when, that's Bellator, one of Bellator's champions. He's got the war with Eddie Alvarez. I guess the first fight was a submission for Michael Chandler. Second fight was, one of the most famous fights in Bellator history as far as I can remember. The war with Eddie Alvarez and Michael Chandler, of course. But Michael Chandler's got wins over Benson Henderson, Patricio Pitbull, David Caveman Rickles. This is going to be a great fight. Michael Chandler, though, is definitely going to be the most experienced opponent Georgi Yamaguchi has faced to date, and I'm picking Michael Chandler to come in here and get that W. Michael Chandler is coming off of losing his title to Brent Primus. In that fight, Michael Chandler's ankle, something happened like very early in the first round, leg injury, and so he wasn't able to win the fight. But if I recall, even on one leg, he either dropped or he landed a big shot on Brent Primus, but he wasn't able to win the fight on one leg. He wasn't able to pull a Robert Whittaker versus Yoel Romero, but the injury seemed actually a little worse there. Like, he was for real hobbled in that fight. So a lot of us expected Michael Chandler to get an immediate rematch, but that's not the case. Looks like he's got to go through Georgi Yamaguchi first, and I'm picking Michael Chandler to get that done. Now, to the bracket busting co-main event. Rampage Jackson versus Chael Sonnen. Man, I had Chael Sonnen at first just because Rampage, one of his weaknesses has been wrestling. Whenever a wrestler gets a hold of Rampage Jackson, the fight can be kind of boring because they know if they're throwing hands and Rampage connects, he might just knock your block off and scramble your eggs. So a lot of people don't want to throw hands with Rampage Jackson, and he gets taken down and wrestle humped, as he says. They like to hump his legs. So Chael Sonnen is a wrestler. That's what he does. That's his game plan. So originally I was thinking, man, yeah, Chael Sonnen's just going to take him down repeatedly or try that as a game plan, and we've seen it have success versus Rampage Jackson. But as I said earlier in the video, I've been seeing a lot of Rampage leading up to this fight. He seems motivated, he seems confident, and he even seems fine. Originally when he heard about the Chael Sonnen matchup, he was like, man, he seemed down about it. Like, I don't want to fight a fucking wrestler. But now leading up to the fight, getting closer to the actual fight, he's looking motivated, talking about Chael's not getting no takedowns, and that made me think about it some more. Like, man, this is a heavyweight tournament. It's a heavyweight Grand Prix. Chael Sonnen's, we know Chael Sonnen's not winning this tournament. It's just, former middleweight, former light heavyweight. Chael Sonnen's not going to win the heavyweight title. I just don't see that happening now. Even though he's got a good matchup versus Rampage Jackson, I just feel like Rampage Jackson has, he's going to be a lot bigger than a lot of the guys Chael Sonnen has fought. So his wrestling is not going to really be as effective as it usually would be, or as, if Rampage Jackson was fighting a bigger wrestler, it might be more of a problem. So I'm changing my pick on my very original first instinct bracket pick, and I'm going with Rampage Jackson. We don't even have to look into these guys' records and their resumes. We know Chael Sonnen and Rampage Jackson, former UFC fucking legends, MMA legends, and now they're in Bellator doing the heavyweight Grand Prix. I'm picking Rampage Jackson. So you can look forward to an updated bracket coming soon. Now, moving to the main event, we've got Rory MacDonald versus the current Bellator welterweight champion, Douglas Lima. Man, Douglas Lima, great fighter. I believe he's coming off of a title defense over Lorenz Larkin, where a lot of people picked Lorenz Larkin to actually win that fight because Lorenz Larkin was coming from the UFC and yada, yada, yada. But Douglas Lima impressed a lot of people and, you know, showed a lot of the world that the Bellator champions can compete with UFC fighters whenever he beat Lorenz Larkin. Now, he's not only just fighting a UFC fighter in this fight in Rory MacDonald, he's fighting one of the best MMA fighters in the world. Rory MacDonald has a win over the current UFC welterweight champion Tyron Woodley, and now he's in Bellator, and he just got a win over Paul Daly, so it's looking like Rory MacDonald is back in action. Now, he left the UFC on a 2-fight losing streak, I believe, one of those losses being to Robbie Lawler, and the other loss being to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. In the Robbie Lawler fight, Rory MacDonald definitely went through a war, got his nose broken, and a lot of people wondered, like, man, are you going to be able to be the same after going through a war like that? And those questions have pretty much been answered. Now, he's going to be fighting Douglas Lima, and some people might be picking Douglas Lima because he's coming off an impressive win, but you know, and I was tempted for a split second to kind of like think about picking Douglas Lima, and then I was like, yeah, no, I'm going with Rory. Rory MacDonald's coming through here, man. Bellator, and I don't know if this is a fact, but I just think Bellator has a lot of stock in Rory MacDonald winning, and that doesn't have anything to do with the fight. I just also believe Rory MacDonald's the better fighter here. He's fought a lot more experienced guys, the best guys in the world in the UFC and outside of the UFC. You know what I'm saying? So Rory MacDonald is just really, he's not only the most experienced opponent Douglas Lima's fought as far as championship experience, but he's just a world-class fighter, Rory MacDonald. Now, we'll see. I think this fight will really show us where Rory MacDonald is, and even though I think those questions got answered in the Paul Daly fight, I don't know why I feel like people still have some questions about Rory MacDonald. Maybe at least until he gets this win and becomes the Bellator welterweight champion. Once he does that, I think we're in serious business. He's talked about moving up and maybe potentially getting another belt. And you know what I'm saying? Think about this. If Rory MacDonald becomes the Bellator champion, we can start talking about a co-promote, because the Bellator welterweight champion will have a win over the UFC welterweight champion, and we can really get to talking. Now, Douglas Lima looks forward to beating Rory MacDonald and showing everybody that he's one of the pound-for-pound best fighters on the planet. But if Douglas Lima does happen to beat Rory MacDonald, I don't think that people will look at Douglas Lima as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters on the planet, just because then I think people, if Rory wins, I think he'll answer people's doubts. But if he loses, I think people will have that, you know, excuse of, you know, after the Robbie Lawler war, Rory MacDonald was never the same. So I think if Douglas Lima wins, unfortunately for him, people are going to say Rory was a shell of himself. But if not, if Rory MacDonald wins, I think it will actually be big. And I actually think he's the better fighter in this fight. So I'm picking Rory MacDonald to win the fight. Douglas Lima, though, much respect on his name. We know his brother Diego Lima was in The Ultimate Fighter, season 25. I watched that whole season. So yeah, you know, they're a family of fighters. So you know they're some of the best fighters in the world. But Rory MacDonald, just in my mind right now, if he's the Rory MacDonald we all, you know and love, but you know what I'm saying, then he should be able to get this win. So it is what it is. These are my Bellator predictions. Thanks for watching these, and once again, shout out to we gotta look at the top of the screen, Paulo C for the $10 donation. Much appreciated, good sir. It is what it is. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments. I'm out.
Da 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 da! It's the motherfucking DOWG!